Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this afternoon's webinar over the student equity, the transportation and district cost per pupil webinar that Sean Snyder is presenting. I'm Phil Jennery, Government Relations Director for the Iowa Association of School Boards. And before we get started, I just want to highlight a couple things. IASB has taken a solution-based advocacy approach here, and this webinar is a product of the hard work that IASB is doing on behalf of school boards across the state. While these two proposals are still going through the vetting process, IASB has met with key legislators and stakeholders on these issues. IASB has also continued its work on ensuring that the legislature provides timely and adequate supplemental state aid, a new statewide assessment tool, and a repeal of the sunset on SAVE. But the purpose today is to share these two proposals with you. The legislature will be taking up several key education issues this session. Maybe a few particular issues affect your district the most, and you would like to learn a little bit more about them and how to effectively advocate on them. IASB will be hosting action advocacy workshops this winter with you in mind. We would like to make these workshops as district specific as possible, so please be on the lookout in the coming weeks about a workshop near you. Also, IASB's Day on the Hill will be February 8th, and although the event is a little bit later this year, but this will give us a great opportunity to talk to our legislators about a week or so before they're supposed to come to an agreement on supplemental state aid. And what an opportunity that it would be to have over 1,900 school board members at the Capitol talking to their legislators about that. And this year, the majority of our time will be spent at the Capitol, so that'll give you ample time to speak with your legislators. As I said before, there are over 1,900 school board members across the state. Legislators want to hear from elected board members. When IASB is up doing our lobbying at the Capitol, it does make such a difference when we're talking with legislators and they know exactly the issues that we're talking about because board members have reached out to them. So now is the time that the board members can be reaching out to your legislators, but before they go up to the Capitol, and make clear your goals and your board's goals for this upcoming legislative session. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. And also, we are recording this webinar, so if you have to step aside or if anybody can't make it, we will be posting it on the website so you can catch anything that you have missed. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sean, and he's going to get started talking about our two proposals today.
Thanks, Phil. Good afternoon. Just the first slide here, just our contact information. So if you do think of questions after we've presented this information, if you'd like to give us a call or shoot us an email, you can either contact me or Patty, and we can help you with that. Really, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about two issues. First one is the transportation cost, and the second one is the differences in the district cost per pupil across the state. And I'm just going to kind of go through quickly kind of the background on both of these issues. First, on the transportation costs. Every school district in the state transports students to and from school, and they all have those costs built into the regular program. And every district pays for those transportation costs out of the regular program. But the costs vary significantly across the state between school districts. And the key thing here is, again, those costs are coming out of each district's regular program amount. So we take a look at the overall impact across the state, and this is just based on fiscal year 2014 data. So the entire bar represents the district cost per pupil. We have the minimum, the median, the maximum, and the quartiles. So basically what I want to show here is you know, basically every school district received about $6,100 per pupil in fiscal year 2014. But what's happening here is that there's a difference in what's remaining for instruction purposes. So over here on the far right-hand side, you can see that out of the $6,100 or $6,200 per pupil, this district has over $6,100 available for instruction costs. They're only spending $100 out of their for transportation costs. On the right-hand side, where the district is spending quite a bit for transportation, that's coming out of the regular program. So when you factor that out, they only have about $5,100 left for instructional purposes. So you can see we have this issue across the state, and this just really shows the wide range there is. So it goes from about $5,100 per student to over $6,100 per student. After you take out the transportation costs, what is left over for instructional purposes. Again, this is kind of a similar view as when you take out the transportation costs out of the regular program district cost per pupil. What that difference is, it lines every school district up from the low, what's left over on the low side of the just under $5,100, all the way up to the district that has over $6,100. And really the range of this is over $1,000 difference, which is about 20%. So really that is a significant difference across the state. And this just shows a map of Iowa showing what percentage of the regular program school districts have for transportation costs. And the dark shaded red areas are the districts that have the highest transportation costs per pupil compared to the lighter gray districts that have the lowest cost per pupil. And I guess the thing I'd point out here is in general, when you look at the districts, it kind of looks like it's a district size issue. The larger the districts, they're more likely to have higher transportation costs, but that's not always the case. So you can kind of take a look at this map and see, you know, where your district lies on the overall scale. The second issue that we're going to talk about, the second proposal talks about, is the differences in the district cost per pupil. I'm sure most of you are aware that there is a $175 difference from the maximum district cost per pupil to the minimum district cost per pupil. And roughly about half the school districts, 164 districts, are at the minimum level, and that's the $6,446, and that's for fiscal year 16. While the other half, 172 districts, are somewhere above that, and the maximum amount is $6,621. There's 6 districts at that level. So the range between the district cost per pupil amounts is about $175. And that's what this graphic shows, is just basically lines up the minimum district cost per pupil, compares it to the maximum, and measures in between. And again, you can see that the difference is $175. But what kind of the significant thing here is, when you take a look at the map of the state of Iowa, is you have neighboring districts that have the large differences. So the shaded red, the dark red areas, are the districts that have the district cost per pupil equal to the state cost per pupil, which is $6,446. And the other shading, those are all above that level, and it goes up to the dark blue, and those districts are the ones that are $175 above the state cost per pupil. So there we have a difference. The difference is about 2.7%. When you compare that, and you can see that there are neighboring districts where they would have the whole $175 difference. So really, we put together 2 proposals. One is regarding the transportation. What we're going to do there is we're going to create a supplementary weighting for transportation costs, and the second proposal addresses the differences in the district cost per pupil, where we're going to equalize that across the state and across time. So really what the goal of these proposals are is to basically provide equity. We're going to equalize the district cost per pupil, and that's reflected by this blue bar. Every school district will receive the same amount on the district cost per pupil, and every district will have a separate funding stream to fund transportation costs, and that's represented by the red bar. So each district would have the same amount for instruction purposes, and the districts that require more transportation funding are going to generate more transportation funding through this supplementary weighting. However, the one thing I'd point out is the supplementary weighting proposal is going to generate funding for all school districts. So that's what the goals of our proposals are, is to create student equity and provide an equalization on the district cost per pupil. Just a note on the limitations of the estimates. I did do all these runs on a district-by-district basis. I used the most recent available data that I could get on the transportation costs and on current law. So basically, I had to make some assumptions going forward because we are phasing these proposals in over time. So I did use a variety of assumptions, and I just want to point out that when I get new data, hopefully in December and in January, I will rerun all these estimates and provide updates on them as well. But this is as I go through this right now, this is the most current information that I have at the time. So the first one is the transportation supplementary weighting. We talked about the issue is that all districts are using regular program dollars to get students to and from school, and the cost can vary significantly. We saw it was over $1,000 difference across the state. So what we're going to do under this proposal is create a supplementary weighting that is designated for transportation funding, and it's going to be funded through the school aid formula. Now the weighting is based on 3 factors, and we're still kind of vetting these, but these are the 3 factors that we're using right now. The largest factor is the net operating transportation cost to regular program cost. That information is reported to the Department of Education on the transportation report. So really it's the net operating cost for each school district. And what I did is I took a 3-year rolling average, would have been fiscal year 12 through fiscal year 14, and I took the net operating cost for each school district and compared it to their overall regular program cost. And most of the weighting that we're going to be used is going to be generated from this factor. 90% of the weighting is going to be based on that factor. And I have had discussions with the Department of Education on this. They believe that the report that they have is the best apples-to-apples information they have on transportation costs. And they also said that as they move forward, the fiscal year 13 and fiscal year 14 data, they believe they're very confident in the accuracy of that, and they feel that the fiscal year 15 data is going to be very solid as well. So when I get updated information for fiscal year 15, I will revise these weightings as well. I have 2 other factors that are based on, one's on an enrollment factor. So larger school districts would generate a larger weighting based on enrollment, and the other factor is a student population density factor, which is basically for more rural school districts where they have larger transportation routes, fewer students. That's going to generate a little bit larger weighting for those districts as well. The one thing I want to point out is the enrollment factor and the student population density factor will account for 10% of the overall weighting. Really the largest portion of it's coming from that Department of Education transportation report. Now the funding that I took a look at was based on that net operating costs from the transportation report, and in fiscal year 14 that amount totaled $150 million. So that was kind of the target figure that I used when I was calculating the weighting, and I wanted to generate basically, once this was fully phased in, fully implemented, we would be targeting that $150 million figure. So the weighting was set to generate that level based on the state cost per pupil each year. We are going to phase this in based on our proposal over a 5-year period of time. And the funding will be based on the weighting level and the state cost per pupil for each of the fiscal years. And the one thing I want to point out is the level of funding in future years could be increased based on a weighting factor. So I'm going to kind of go through that in the next couple of slides. So what this does is it really frees up regular program funds, so every school district will be able to use their entire district cost per pupil for instruction purposes. They won't have to use, once this is fully phased in, they won't have to use a regular program to pay for transportation costs. Really, since it's funded through the school aid formula, it does create a simple mechanism to increase funding for transportation, and it promotes efficiency. And again, since it's funded through the school aid formula, there's local tax dollars that are included in the mechanism because of the foundation level. And it also will provide each school district a budget framework on their transportation costs that they can work within. So what we're proposing, again, is a phase-in over 5 years. So the cost each year would be $30 million. The phase-in would begin in fiscal year 2017. And since we're generating the funding through the school aid formula, there would be a property tax portion as well. So based on the foundation level, the state cost for this provision would be about $26 million, and the property tax provision would be about $4 million. The phase-in would be complete by fiscal year 2021. That's when we would have targeted, 5 years of a $30 million increase each year. So the total funding generated from the supplementary weighting would total $150 million plus any growth due to supplemental state aid. Because since this is funded through the school aid formula and we're using the state cost per pupil, it would be subject to supplemental state aid increases. And the one thing I do want to note is that we're not, what we're doing is we're making sure every school district gets some funding every year. But the districts with the higher costs are going to generate more funding as a percentage of their overall regular program cost. But I will point out that every school district would generate some type of transportation funding through this initiative. So this is kind of how it worked. We assume 2% just for example purposes each year for fiscal year 17 through fiscal year 2021. And like I said, basically since it's a 5-year phase-in, we're targeting a funding level of $30 million increase each year. The weighting factor in year 2 would be 2 because we're basically going to take the weighting that we had in year 1 and double it. Similar in year 3, the weighting factor is going to be 3 because we're tripling the initial weighting and so on down the line until year 5. When we're going to take that initial weighting, the weighting factor will be 5. Foundation level under this is 87.5%, which is a regular program foundation. So that's kind of what I used for the estimates for this purpose. And this is what it looks like overall on a statewide basis. The first column over here shows what the transportation supplementary weighting would be. And basically this would be supplementary weighting like a student FTE count. So in fiscal year 17, the supplementary weighting would total 4,562. And that level of weighting is going to generate $30 million in transportation funding through the school aid formula. The state aid portion would be $26.2 million, and the property tax portion would be $3.7 million. Now, for fiscal year 18, we're using that weighting factor of 2, so we're doubling the initial weighting. So the weighting for fiscal year 2018 is 9,125. Now, when you apply the 2% supplemental state aid rate to that, that's going to generate now $61.2 million for transportation funding. $53.5 million is going to be state dollars, and $7.6 million will come from local property taxes. And then you can guys, in fiscal year 19, the weighting factor is 3. And just using that same methodology, by fiscal year 2021, this would be fully phased in. So the supplementary weighting would be 22,813, and that's going to generate $162 million for transportation funding. And again, the reason it's not $150 million is because we're applying that 2% supplemental state aid for this, for example purposes. The state portion of this would be about $142 million, and the local property tax statewide basis would be about $20 million. So you can see by fiscal year 2021, with the 2% supplemental state aid, we would be generating $162 million, and this would be fully phased in, so each school district would have funding that they would not have to take out of the regular program. They would be able to fund their transportation costs from this supplementary weighting. This is just kind of another view of the overall cost. I broke it down. So the annual proposal increase would be $30 million, and that's reflected over here on the left-hand side. You can kind of see it's $26.25 million in state aid and $3.75 million in property tax. Now, if the supplemental state aid rate were 0, that's what this impact would be. It would be for every year, that would total $150 million. But the middle column areas show what the impact is of 2% supplemental state aid. So you can see by fiscal year 2021, we've now generated an additional $5 million from this proposal. And again, when you combine the two, we start out at $30 million, but the overall cost by fiscal year 2021 would be $35 million in just the fifth year of the proposal. Just listed some pros and cons to this. One pro, and I think it's a big one, is it does provide additional funding to all school districts. Every school district is going to get funding from this every single year that this is in place. Another pro that I think is a really strong pro is it frees up regular program dollars for all school districts. So since every school district is getting funding from this, every school district is going to free up the regular program dollars, and obviously the districts with the higher transportation costs per pupil are going to free up more dollars per pupil. A con to this is the overall cost of this proposal, and this is something that the legislature would have to weigh. It's the cost of this is going to be $150 million after it's fully implemented, and that is a heavy lift. A pro and a con is, a pro is that since we're phasing this in over time, we can kind of limit the costs on an annual basis. We've gone with 5 years, so the cost, would be $30 million each year. We think that's doable. Legislature might have a different idea, but anyway, we're not saying we want this funded all in 1 year. We were phasing it out over time. But that is kind of a con of this as well, as we're not solving the problem in 1 year. It's going to take a few years for us to get this implemented and fully solve the problem in 5 years. Another pro that I think is good is since it's part of the school aid formula, it's really a flexible school aid funding mechanism, and it can be adjusted to the desired level funding that the legislature might want. So for instance, say that the legislature really likes this proposal and they have $50 million that they could do each year. Then this could be phased in over a 3-year period of time rather than a 5-year period of time. The opposite is true. If the legislature liked this but didn't feel like they had the funding to do this over 5 years, they could still do it over 10 years by changing that weighting factor to the appropriate level. So really, and another thing is since it's funded through the school aid formula, I was using a foundation level of 87.5%, but if the legislature wanted to provide more property tax relief for this provision, there's no reason they couldn't change that foundation level for this provision and increase it to 90% or 95%. Or if they wanted to fully fund it with state dollars, they could make it 100% foundation level. But it does provide some flexibility since it's being funded through the school aid formula. Just some additional thoughts on this. The funding is designated for non-discretionary transportation costs, and that's an important point. I did talk to the Department of Education. This might have to be reviewed a little bit. As we phase this in, this could be something that's studied a little more to make sure that we are capturing the costs of the non-discretionary transportation costs. This will need some oversight. We are recommending a 5-year review of this provision every 5 years. So basically the legislature would take a look at it, make sure that everything's running the course as they deem fit. The phase-in period can be adjusted. I've talked about that a little bit before. So if there was funding and the legislature really liked this proposal, they could bump it up quicker than a 5-year phase-in. Or if they didn't feel like they had the funding but they did want to implement it, they could put it in place over a 10-year period of time at about $15 million a year. I also noted the foundation level can be adjusted. So if they wanted to provide more property tax relief for this provision, they could just increase the foundation level. And again, as this is implemented, there may be reasons to adjust those weightings during the phase-in period, and again, this would allow for that as well.
And Sean, before you go on, we received a question on if somebody could go back and view this webinar later. Yes, we are recording the webinar, and we will have that on our website under the Advocacy Center. So if you miss any part or have to leave early and want to catch the ending, we will have that posted probably later this afternoon on our website under the Advocacy Center, so you can go there and finish or catch up on any parts that you might have missed.
And I am moving pretty quickly, so I can probably stop here for a couple minutes and take a couple questions. If you want to type them in, I can answer a couple questions. All right. Well, I'll move on then. So the second proposal is the equalization of the regular program district cost per pupil. Kind of talked about this issue as well. We have that $175 difference. So what this proposal does is it basically it closes that $175 gap over a 9-year period of time. And how we're going to do that is we're going to increase the floor, really the state cost per pupil, and we're going to increase it by $20 per year until the district cost, all the district cost per pupil amounts are equal. So really it's a 9-year phase-in. So the first 8 years we're going to add $20 to the state cost per pupil and kind of bring the district cost per pupils up along with that. And then in the last year, the gap will be closed. We'll increase the state cost per pupil by an additional $15. So from fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2024, we'll increase the state cost per pupil by $20 each year. And then that last year, fiscal year 2025, we'll close the gap with that $15 difference. And that would basically, we would have all school districts with an equal district cost per pupil. All districts would still get the per pupil growth resulting from supplemental state aid. Districts that are less than $20 above the state cost per pupil will have their district cost per pupils increase to the new state cost per pupil level. So they, more than likely they're going to get up to an additional $20 increase on an annual basis. Now the districts that are above the state cost per pupil already, like the districts that are at the top, the 6 districts that have that $175 difference, they aren't ever going to get any of the increase resulting from this, but what they are going to get is they're going to get the benefit of added property tax relief, because when you increase the state cost per pupil, which is what we're doing with that additional $20, we're also increasing the foundation level per pupil amount, and when you do that, it creates property tax relief for the school districts that are at the higher end here. So this is an example of how it works. So the top box there just kind of shows supplemental state aid under the current law scenario. We would assume 2% for this example. So we take the 2%, we multiply that times the fiscal year 16 state cost per pupil of $64.46. That generates a $129 increase for the state cost per pupil and every district cost per pupil as well. So under current law scenario, the new fiscal year 2017 state cost per pupil would be $65.75. And keep in mind, that's the floor for the district cost per pupils as well. Now what we're going to do is at the very bottom there is we're going to add $20 to that amount. So we're adding $20. So under this proposal, the new state cost per pupil for fiscal year 17 would be $6,595. So under this scenario, we have 3 districts, District A, District B, and District C. District A is at the $64.46. So basically they're at the floor amount in fiscal year 16. So District A is going to get that $129 increase resulting from 2% supplemental state aid. And that's going to move them to the $65.75. Now, since we bumped up the state cost per pupil with that additional $20, the next question is the fiscal year 17 district cost per pupil under the current law scenario less than the new proposed state cost per pupil? The answer is yes. So we take the difference between the $65.95 and the $65.75. They get the $20 increase. That brings them up to the new proposed fiscal year 17 state cost per pupil of $6,595. Now District B, they were slightly above. They were $10 above the state cost per pupil in fiscal year 2016. They also get the full supplemental state aid increase of $129. So that brings up their, under current law scenario, their cost per pupil to $65.85. So we take, again, we ask the question, is their district cost per pupil less than the new proposed state cost per pupil? And the answer is yes, by $10. So they get the additional $10, and that brings District B, their new district cost per pupil under this proposal, up to $65.95. So you can see we've equalized District A and District B's cost per pupil in this process. Now District C, they're one of the six districts that have that are $175 above the state cost per pupil. Now they will get that $129 increase based on the 2% supplemental state aid. So their district cost per pupil under current law scenario would be $6,750. But when we compare that to our proposed state cost per pupil, they're still above that level. So they do not get any of that additional bump increase. But they remain above the state cost per pupil because they're at $6,750. But what we've done here now is we've closed that gap. Rather than it being $175, the gap is now $155. So we continue this process over a 9-year period of time, and by fiscal year 2025, all the district cost per pupil amounts will be equalized. And this is really kind of what the table I just showed you. This is just a graphical representation of the same thing. And again, this is kind of a more detailed look at how this works over a 9-year period of time. This is assuming a 2% supplemental state aid rate each year. So it just kind of repeats that process each year. And again, so you can see the blue bar is District A, the red bar is District B, the green bar is District C. So you can see by fiscal year 17, we already went through that example, we've equalized the gap between District A and District B. So we've closed that gap in year 1. But District C is a little, they were quite a bit higher on their district cost per pupil. So it takes the entire time to get the 9-year period before we actually get all the school districts across the state equalized. But the one thing I would point out is that District C, even though they're not getting the $20 increase resulting from that bump up in the state cost per pupil, they are still getting the supplemental state aid growth increase, and what they are getting is they are getting additional property tax relief through this provision. So by fiscal year 2025, we would have completely closed the gap on the district cost per pupil difference. And this is the same view. I put this in here just to kind of show that it works no matter what the supplemental state aid rate is. I use 0 under this circumstance for this example. So it's really the same impact. District C won't be getting any per pupil growth because supplemental state aid is 0 in this example. But what they are getting is they're getting property tax relief each year. And you still have the same equalization by fiscal year 2025. So no matter what the supplemental state aid rate is, it doesn't matter if it's 0, 2, or 4, we would accomplish this goal over a 9-year period of time. And that's really what this slide is meant to show. This again is kind of a table that just shows the overall impact. So under the current law scenario, kind of the columns I want to point out is you would basically always have this difference. You'd have 164 districts where the state cost per pupil is equal to the district cost per pupil, and you would have 172 districts where the district cost per pupil is above the state cost per pupil. If it's 2% and we don't do anything, we're always going to have that $175 gap, and we're always going to have this difference. But under the proposal, what I'd point out is you can kind of see how that gap narrows. So we have more districts where the state cost per pupil is equal to the district cost per pupil, and by fiscal year 2025, we would have everybody equalized under this proposal. And the last column really shows the added property tax relief of this proposal. And what it does is you can see under the current law scenario what the foundation level per pupil amount is, and then under the proposal what the foundation level per pupil amount is. And basically what that's going to do is that's going to provide additional property tax relief, especially for the districts that are already above the state cost per pupil. So even though the districts that are $175 above the state cost per pupil aren't going to get any of that bump up increase, they are going to get some additional property tax relief. And this really is the costing scenario of this proposal. I'm assuming 2% supplemental state aid each year, and we're doing the $20 increase each year. If we were to do this in 1 year, the state cost would be about $97 million, but it would provide about $12 million in property tax relief. But we're phasing this in over a 9-year period of time. So really, the cost of the proposals are reflected in this column right here. And this is based on current law scenarios at 2%. If the legislature decided to extend the property tax relief provision from the supplemental state aid piece, that's currently set through fiscal year 17. If they decided to extend that through fiscal year 2025, then the state cost of this proposal would go up somewhat. But this is as it stands right now. So in year one, the state cost of this would be about $11 million. And then going forward from fiscal year 18 through fiscal year 2025, the cost is going to range between $9 million and about $11 million in any specific year. So again, we'll kind of weigh the pros and cons of this. A pro is that all districts get something every year. Either they're going to get the additional per pupil increase, which is going to increase spending authority, or if they're not getting the per pupil increase in that year, what they're getting is they're going to get additional property tax relief. Because when you increase the state cost per pupil by that $20, we're also increasing the foundation level. A pro is basically when this is fully phased in, it equalizes all the district cost per pupil amounts across the state. Every school district will be generating the same amount of funding for the regular program. A con and a pro. A con is the cost of this. As I said, we're talking if we're phased in 1 year, it's $97 million. Phased in over 9 years, the cost range between $8 million and about $11 million. But a pro of this, since we are phasing it over a 9-year period of time, it does kind of ease the burden on the overall cost. You can spread it out over time. A con, obviously, is it would take 9 years to achieve the goal of equalizing every school district's district cost per pupil. Just some final thoughts on this, and then I'll kind of open it up for questions if you have any. Again, the phase-in period we targeted was 9 years, roughly $20 each year. But again, if the legislature liked this, they could shorten the period. They could target 5 years or even shorter. But understanding that state resources might be tough to come by in the next couple of years, they could actually draw this out over a longer period of time too to kind of ease the burden on the overall state budget. But that flexibility is built into this, so that is there. As I said earlier, if this were done in 1 year, say this next fiscal year, it would cost $97 million in state aid, but it would provide property tax reduction of about $12 million. So the overall cost, when you weigh those two factors together, is about $85 million. Not likely to happen, I wouldn't think, in this upcoming legislative session that they do it in 1 year. And again, I already mentioned this, is that the future costs of this proposal would be impacted by the supplemental state aid property tax replacement payment. That's an extra pickup where the state picks up the entire increase in the per pupil cost resulting from state percent of growth. That provision's in place through fiscal year 2017, but the legislature does seem pretty interested in that provision, so there's a good chance that they would extend that. If they did, I would have to rerun the estimates on this, on the cost. That would increase the overall state cost of this proposal somewhat. All right. Interested, if you have any questions, we do have about 15 minutes that we could take some questions if you have any. I think you can just type them in your box on the right-hand side if you do have some. Otherwise, if you want to email Patty or me, we would be happy to answer questions. And I do want to emphasize too that, like I said, once I get updated data in December and January, I will be revising all these estimates. And one of the things that we do plan on doing is making this available on a district-by-district basis. So this would be, we don't have it ready yet, but this would be one of the toolkits that we'd be putting on our website, so you could actually see the impact on each of the school districts. We do have a question, is which proposal will cost more? The transportation proposal, if it was fully implemented, would cost about $150 million. So that would cost more. The district cost per pupil amount, like I said, would, if they did it in 1 year, it would cost about $97 million. So roughly, if you can phase that in over a 9-year period of time, it's going to cost roughly about $100 million over that period of time. So the transportation proposal does cost a little bit more. We got a question on why the discrepancy was built into the formula in the first place. So back in the 70s, when they created the school aid formula, what they did is basically they took kind of the overall expenditures for school districts on the regular, what would have been considered kind of the regular program piece, and they took that amount on a statewide basis and divided it by the statewide enrollment. And they came up with a state cost per pupil based on that calculation. What they did then is they said, okay, every district that's below this state cost per pupil, we're going to bring them up to that level. So that was basically kind of the floor. Every district that was below the floor was brought up to the floor. The districts that were above that is basically, I think at the time they had a 10% difference, and they eventually squeezed that down to a 5% variance. And so when they squeezed that difference down to 5%, that's really where that $175 difference comes from. Is at one time that $175 reflected a 5% difference. Right now that $175 represents a 2.7% difference, but if nothing changes, that $175 difference is going to remain in place until eternity. The second proposal we talked about, that's where we're basically eliminating that difference across all school districts. Another question, will transportation funding be handled in a separate fund different than the general fund, or will be included in the general fund subject to spending authority requirements? Good question. So the way we have it set up right now is this is going to be funded through the school aid formula. It would be part of the school district's general fund, but it would be considered categorical funding. So I think you could kind of compare it to the transportation funding would be designated for that purpose. So it'd be kind of like on par with at-risk funding, where you have to use the funds for, it's part of the general fund, it's part of your spending authority, but you have to use it for specific purposes. It would be similar to that. So it'd be part of the school district's general fund, but it'd be targeted funding used for specific purposes, in this case, transportation. And it would generate spending authority. Well, we have about 10 more minutes for questions.
I do want to say too, this is Phil again. We wanted to get this out there. Again, we're meeting with key legislators and stakeholders over these, and I would love to hear your feedback and suggestions. This is also something maybe you might want to discuss at your board meetings here in the next few months, just to kind of get it on the radar. We hope that this will be something that the legislature will take up this upcoming session.
Okay, got a question on due to reorganization and increased distances, there have been discussions regarding transportation athletes after practices. This would be considered discretionary. Yes, I think in this case, yes, that would be considered discretionary and not part of the proposal, or not eligible for funding from this proposal. Question about the Republican Senate caucus is meeting in a couple weeks, and we are presenting this information. We've been requested to present this information to that caucus. I think it's in a couple weeks. So, and we have been meeting with, as Phil said, we have been meeting with individual legislators and other groups as well to kind of get their feedback. And I would add too that, you know, we're still kind of in the vetting process on this. As I said, I'm still kind of pondering the overall, you know, the factors that go into the supplementary weighting for transportation. I mean, for sure, it's the information from the Department of Education on their net operating costs will definitely be a large factor. And then just again, for that last question, we're meeting on November 17th with the Senate Republican caucus. We have not met with the governor's office on this. I'm not sure what his thoughts would be. I have talked to Department of Education staff. They didn't really weigh in on, you know, I kind of just wanted to make sure that they were okay with what we put together, and I think the sense was that, yes, I think they were okay with this. So the next question is, has there been any analysis on the impact of instruction if transportation costs continue to come out of the regular program? Good question. I'm not aware of any. If anybody knows of any, that would be some good information for us to have. I think we are hopeful that we will be presenting to the legislative interim on December 2nd. There's a legislative interim committee that's meeting on inequity issues in the school aid formula. It's kind of our understanding that we're tentatively scheduled, so that might be a question that they'd be interested in as well. So if anybody who's listening has some information on that, I'd be willing, I'd like to see that. Will IASB promote these equalization items over supplemental state aid? No, because supplemental state aid is very important as well. To be frank, though, I mean, it is going to be, you know, I'm sure the legislators will look at, you know, if we're giving you $30 million for transportation costs, that's going to reduce the amount of supplemental state aid. But we view supplemental state aid as a major issue for us.
Yeah, I would say our top priorities will be supplemental state aid and making sure that it's done timely and adequately, and then also getting the statewide assessment tool done and funded as well. So I think, so yeah, you know, supplemental state aid will be one of our very top priorities.
I've got another question. Will there be discussions at IASB convention regarding these proposals? Patty and I will be having a breakout session on Thursday to discuss this. We'll probably be going through the same proposal, but yeah, we will be doing this again. It'll allow for additional questions and comments on that. So encourage your board members. Yeah, encourage your board members to attend that as well. The question is there any way to protect the regular program money saved with transportation funding from collective bargaining? Good question. I don't have the answer to that right now. I would say that, you know, the intent is to free up regular program fund dollars for every school district. Really, that's the only answer I have to that right now, but that's a good question. We have a question. If a school district currently uses 1% sales tax money for renting buses, will that artificially reduce their transportation allocation when looking backwards to set funding weights? I'm not sure. I'm going to have to do some research on that question. If you could shoot me an email on that one, that that might be a good conversation that you and I have to have on that specific question.
Do we have anything?
Okay, the question is, when calculating the transportation costs, did you consider the per pupil funding costs that are paid from the management fund, Pupil, or sales tax funds? I used the Department of Education's transportation report from the net operating costs, and it's my understanding that that really reflects general funding only. So they would not have any of those costs.
Get the child to the front door.
It's right. It's just the funding that's used to get the student to the front door for instructional purposes.
Good question.
Yeah, very good questions. Really appreciate this. Really helps us as we move forward as well when you have questions like this. We have a couple more minutes if you have any more questions.
Yeah, so we had a question about the PowerPoint and will it be an audio and will it be available on the IASB website? Yes, we will get this recorded and uploaded onto our website, and it will be under the Advocacy Center of our website, and we will do that. It'll probably be up there later this afternoon or Monday.
Question is, what are the chances that the legislature will act on this? You know,
6 bills last year.
yeah, I would say the House is definitely interested in the transportation solution. They had 6 bills last year. None of them made them out of committee, but that's not to say that there wasn't will to get it out of the Education Committee. I definitely think, you know, and I think the previous session they did bring one out of the Education Committee. So I think, you know, again, it kind of depends on what the overall budget looks like, but I think, you know, there would be interest in this. I'm not going to say that it's going to happen this legislative session, but I know there's a strong will to do something. And on the district cost per pupil, again, I know there's a strong interest, again, in the House to kind of make sure that the district cost per pupil gets equalized. They do want a solution on that. So, and the fact that they're having an interim committee to look at these issues, I think says a lot too, because they had a 5-year school finance interim last year, and they do that every 5 years, and they didn't really, they reviewed some items last year, but they didn't really address anything. So the fact that they designated another interim committee for this year, I think that says that they are interested in looking for a solution. But whether or not they enact anything this legislative session, I'm not sure. Well, I'll just say I want to thank you for your questions and your attendance. And if you do have any other questions that you think of after this, please email Patty or I. We'd be happy to take a look at that. And thank you.